Here's the thing. I can't heal you. You can't do everything that I did and have the same outcome. My path is my path alone. However, I can tell you my story in hopes that it will inspire you to know yourself deeper, to connect to your inner divine self, and to remember that you are whole and you are love. The body can heal itself if you get out of your own way. And there are a lot of badass humans living their divine purpose that can share their wisdom and mirror your divine self back to you until you believe and embody it as truth. I'm Brittany Dobbs, and this is Waves of Love.
We are here on the first episode with a guest of Waves of Love. And today I have Tina Nance here with me today, and I've known Tina for about 5 years when I first started training with her, which I'll get into in a little bit. But I'm just going to ping it over to Tina to tell us a little bit about what she does.
Hi everyone, I'm Tina Nance, and I'm the founder of HELD, which is the School of Embodied Self Integration. We run classes, retreats, teacher trainings. We have 6 100-hour programs that explore different aspects of embodiment.
Great. Well, so I have taken some of those teacher trainings, and actually met Tina first in 2018, which was about a year into my healing journey for my brain injury. Yeah. And she was one of the teachers on the training, and she came in, did her thing, and I had an incredible experience. I had this moment where, through a yin class, which we will also talk about later, I had dropped so deeply within myself, deeper than I had before, because I was very disconnected from my body before. Yeah. And I just had this moment of like a rush of connection, of joy, and I associated it with self-love. I was like, oh my God, because a little bit before in the training, I had a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I love my body. And that was the first time in like 30 years of life that I could say that I loved my body.
What inspired that moment, I love my body?
You know, I had been doing IFS, which is Internal Family Systems, which is a modality for like psychotherapy. Yeah. And I'd just been diving deeper. And also, I think by the time you came to teach, it had been about a week and a half. So we'd been doing a lot of yoga and breath work, self-inquiry, all of that. And so I think just from the background of talking about that with my therapist and talking about, you know, my inner child and doing inner work and learning about sensations and emotions, and because I really hadn't done any of that before. Right.
So it was like a culmination. Each moment led to that moment.
Yeah. And I had started that work actually before my accident. Yeah. And so then when I had the accident, it like basically took away all my coping mechanisms and everything just flooded in, which was fantastic that I had already started understanding that I can find sensations and connect with the emotions and allow it all kind of move through.
So often when we start on that path of healing, that's things need to fall apart in order to come back together. Do you have that experience?
Yeah. And it happens, you know, multiple times throughout life.
Indeed. Never ending spiral.
But I had one quite very large one.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, but so all of that kind of brought me to that moment where I was like in these postures and allowed things to move through, and it just was like gush, which is also why I called it Waves of Love, the podcast.
Right.
Yeah, because I've had these moments throughout this 6 years of healing from my brain injury. Yeah. That they're just these like deep moments of connection to the body.
And it feels like these embodied waves of love somatically for you.
Yeah. And it's like just you're so connected to the body, but you're also so connected to everything else. Yeah. And it's almost like you get plugged into a light socket.
That's right. I mean, that's definitely my experience, that the body is like a conduit for our essence, and that it speaks through our body. Our soul speaks through our body. And that there's ways of kind of connecting with the language, the voice of the body that allows that to amplify through our practices. Absolutely.
What is the phrase that you say all the time? Our body is, oh my gosh, come back to it because it's a key phrase that you say a lot that has to do
People
with that.
often tell me the things that I say, and I say that.
It's all those like nuggets that when you're just speaking from your heart and doing your thing, they're just channeled through you. So that kind of moment of like the self-love, this connection in, is then what kind of led me to wanting to dive deeper into your work. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So it was the yin practice where you were dropping into your body and just allowing whatever was present to arise.
Yeah, and I think it also had to do with, because when you do yin, you don't just do yin, you do a lot of other things within that. And I think you did the Embodied Unwinding as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah.
But that was just a new, like, I was able to really fully kind of start noticing what's going on inside.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really the beauty of yoga and any embodiment practice, is that it truly is a self-inquiry. So this is something you and I have spoken about previously, is that what I'm really passionate about, like as a practitioner as well, my own practice, but also as a teacher, is to really develop direct pathways, direct connections to our own internal truth. Because on my path, like, I was inspired by spirituality, but it ended up feeling like a continuum of the same seeking outside of myself to know who I was. So what eventually has been the big turnaround for me that has really deepened my practice and my own well-being is really developing this sense of self-trust. And self-trust only arises for me from a place of self-inquiry, when I'm not cognitively listening to philosophy or listening to other people's concepts about the way things are, where I'm being guided back towards my own truth and learning how to listen to my own truth. And I think for all of us, there are as many pathways to our own truth as there are human beings. And what I like to really encourage with my teaching is to discover your own way, to discover your own path. So what that's been for me has been the body. The pathway has been listening to the communication of my body and starting to really learn how to dialogue with the body, to reveal my essence, my soul. And often that will show up as all the places where my body is contracted and stuck. It will show me where I have been believing ideas that are borrowed from outside of me that are not in alignment with my truth, and I'm unpacking that history from my tissues. But it's also a practice that allows me to really constantly tune into the present moment and all that arises through the spaciousness that presence allows, that like that soul essence can speak through that space that the body allows me to enter into.
Okay, so I love that. And you're so incredible at teaching other people how to, or guiding people how to drop within themselves, if that's the way that works for them. Right?
Yeah.
But I know you've been on this like very long, winding journey, like all of us. When did you notice that the body became like that piece? Was there one moment, or maybe,
I think, it's just who I am and always have been. Like when I was little, I'm such a sensitive being, like yourself. I'm such a sensitive being that I feel so much internally that my body is kind of a way of moving and processing that since I was little. I would kind of go into my bedroom and just kind of dance and throw myself around and just to kind of move through whatever I was feeling. And then as I got older, there was this continued connection to embodied practices that were more like dance orientated. And then I found yoga early. I found it in my early 20s. And in that part of my life, I was already in a place of like deep internal curiosity and spiritual inquiry. So as soon as I got onto the yoga mat, I started noticing that inside my yoga practice, and certainly when I got off the mat, there were these radical shifts in how I was feeling. I would notice that I'd be inside a posture and big floods of emotion would come up. I'd get really pissed off inside some postures, or there'd be like a flood of memories or grief, or often in Yin Yoga I cry. And I got really curious about that. I wanted to know why when I put my body in a certain shape, all of a sudden there was a flood of emotional memory, or I could see that my physical body was directly connected to my emotional body, to my mental body. And also, like we just touched on, I noticed that it was also connected to my intuitive body, my spirit body. Through practices, I would have a shift in consciousness, which in the beginning felt like I had access to just good feelings. Like I just felt good after my practice. But also I noticed I would also receive aha moments. I'd receive insights. It'd be a place where I could go to find clarity, where things would just get quiet externally enough that I could tap inside. And then that just became something that I just got really curious around and just dove deeper and deeper into. And there was continued practice. I was practicing every day because I loved it so much. But also I started studying a lot. So that's when there was a lot of the kind of external referencing, but it gave me context. I looked at lots of different systems, Chinese medicine system, kinesiology system, so many different perspectives of how the mind, body, spirit are connected. And via looking at those maps and then exploring those maps in my own direct experience through my body, that's when things started to really ripen and deepen. And that's just continued ad infinitum. Like, yeah, that's my life.
Do you think that people have to reference externally before they can reference internally?
I mean, I think we're born that way. You know, like we come in as little babies that don't have any structure, and we're taught how to function. We're taught language. We're taught, you know, my name is this. I'm a woman. I'm a, you know. So we have all these particular ways of defining who we are and learning how we function that we learn through our parents. But then that just continues, right? Then we go to school and we learn through our teachers and teachings. All the books that we're reading are defined by, you know, I think that's just the way we grow as humans. But eventually, I think what happens, and unfortunately it seems to happen through suffering.
I know.
Right?
That's been my experience anyway. Maybe it's not everyone's.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. Maybe it's not everyone's, but I certainly notice for myself that when all the truths or the things that I borrowed from the outside, they're not aligned with my truth, it hurts. It causes discomfort in the body. It causes pain in the body. It causes disease, right? So eventually, I think, or at least for myself, it got to a point where there was, where my suffering was kind of showing me what I was believing, what I was thinking, and then starting to unpack what I was thinking, what was borrowed truth and what was really my own. So there was this process of unwinding, unraveling, and unpacking the kind of borrowed stuff. And then at the same time, this process of learning how to connect to my own internal knowing. So an unpack and a rebuild, you know, that I think just, I mean, it continues every day.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, that experience, like when I said that everything just came rushing in, and then it was just like, oh my gosh, I have to like pick through all the deconditioning, all of the, you know, the social constructs, the religion, just my entire life just kind of halted. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well now I need to lay in bed because I can't really do a whole lot with this brain injury. Right. And then we're going to have to process 30 years of emotions because I was completely shut off from my emotions. And so I think that's what was so impactful when I came to Bali. I was doing my 200-hour, and then I found this like whole, because my yoga journey started like I went pretty quickly into yoga after my accident, and the only way I could do it though was showing up, and in a studio I would wear earplugs, and I would have a heart rate monitor on, because if my heart rate got too high, I would get really dizzy, and if I had too much input sensory wise, I couldn't practice. It would raise my heart rate. Talk about fine tuning to your body's communication. Right. So that was like, it was a really beautiful experience because of that. Yeah. And so then I come in and it's like, I've done a little IFS, and then it's like, oh, now let's like really feel into what's going on in the body. Yeah. Where is it tight? Where is it giving you sensations? Yeah, I love it. I feel like on the spiritual path, there's kind of the spiritual lens and then the psychological lens. And what I love about IFS, internal family systems, is how it really marries those two. You know, like I feel like in a lot of spiritual practices, there is this concentration on the aha moments. There's a concentration on connecting with higher self and just being in higher self, you know, like, and that can lead, doesn't necessarily, but it did for myself and certainly in people around me that I observed, it can lead to shadowing
parts of your humanness and only wanting to be in one part of yourself, and other parts get
so
denied. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the opposite to wholeness. There is this sense of only wanting to be in what we deem as good or comfortable, and then having to and that creates projection and judgment and a whole lot of complications, right? So either this sense of this goal of not enough, have to get somewhere and be in this certain place all the time, or adversely, and through the psychological lens, can be no connection necessarily to a broader sense of self, and I'm this smaller self and I'm broken and I need to do all this stuff to get fixed. But what I love about IFS is that my experience, and I'd be curious about your own, but my experience has been, how do we anchor in that sense of self, with the adult self, the higher self? How do we anchor in that? But then from that place, how do we then go in and reparent and re-love, basically, all the fragmented smaller selves back into wholeness? And that for me is really that merging of, yes, we go up and out and we connect to our causal being, our spirit being, but then, we're here. Then it comes back down through the body and it integrates into, the world, into our lives. And to do that seems to be this process of I call it a soul retrieval, of this bringing in the parts that got lost on the way.
Yeah.
And for me, I love that this podcast is called Waves of Love, because for me, what's been really crucial in that is compassion. The fragmented parts, or the beliefs that are misaligned with my truth, on some level, they're believing something about disconnection from love. Some part of me not being worthy, some part of me not being lovable, some message that I received about love or lovability or safety, and the rewiring seems to happen with giving those parts the love, whatever that looks like a million different things, right? But giving those parts the love that they didn't receive in that moment, to reframe the messages. So that context of, as corny as it might sound, that love really is the answer.
It is the answer, yeah.
That it's who we are, that it's our soul essence, and we're just realigning with love,
Yeah. And I think I was going to go back to a piece where you were talking about where we go up and out.
Yeah.
And how I think I had to experience that first.
Yes.
To know that connection to wholeness and oneness.
Absolutely.
Before I could fully embrace my body.
Totally.
And then it's each of those parts that we talk about that we're giving compassion, it's they show up every day. It's the different pieces, or a new one will show up. And so it's kind of just an ongoing unfolding of bringing yourself back into wholeness, oneness, but within the body, and being fully present here on this earth.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, before we were kind of touching on this idea of how the body communicates our alignment or misalignment with soul. So the way that works, certainly in my own experience, and it's what I offer for people to explore in their own self-inquiry, is that when we're believing thoughts that are not our truth, that the body literally contracts, that there's something that happens that I don't need to go into the science of it, but that happens in the fluid in our fascia, where there's literally a signaling of the body of contraction. And adversely, when we're aligned with what's really true for us, then there's this openness and this flow and this rhythm and this spaciousness in the body. So when we learn to be present, when we learn to be here in the body, we can listen to that moment to moment. We can hear when, that thing that happens every day when we're inside a part that's that voice in the head that's telling us something that isn't true. We can notice it in the body. That can be our wake up. And then what is it that I'm thinking? What does that part have to say? And, the IFS edition that I love, that's then what does that part need? Rather than just that's not true, get rid of that part, which can also just be sitting on, shadowing those parts, shadowing that voice, trying to get rid of or annihilate or eliminate that voice, to really welcome that part in. Oh, yeah, that's a hard thing to believe.
Yeah, and you've talked about those two wings. What is it? Loving,
the
presence.
2 wings of presence. So, I love this. This is from Tara Brach, who's one of my favorite teachers, a female Buddhist psychologist. she has something she talks about, the two wings of presence. One of those wings being, we could describe it as, more of a masculine wing, through a particular yogic lens of Shiva Shakti. One being this kind of unwavering presence that's, here, undivided, right there, being here in the moment, that spacious awareness, consciousness. But then the other wing is this wing of tenderness and kindness and patience and compassion and nurturing. And I've certainly, in my own experience, been like, just showing up and being present with myself, particularly in traumatic events, has not been sufficient for transmutation. It hasn't been sufficient for my nervous system to calm down, that's for sure. What is required for me in those moments of healing and transformation is, deep compassion and love.
And then, do you believe that we need both of those wings in order for that expansion and like to notice that expansion within us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is very individual, but I feel like for me, when I anchor into love, that brings me into a place of presence. Whereas for others, when they anchor into presence, that brings them into a place of love. I think they're two faces of the same coin. I think that for most of us, if we sink deep enough into one or the other shows up.
There's just different entry points.
That's right. I think so. That's certainly what it feels like for me. There's just dropping into that place of soul wholeness, whatever way works, right?
So, okay, going through that. So, when I started experiencing that within the 200-hour, I decided to sign up for a 100-hour teacher training, which was the week after my 200-hour, I believe, or like I had a week in between. I mean, it was crazy. I was like a year out of my accident, and I was just like full on going in, but it was great.
But I love that about you, Brittany. You're like, let's go.
Let's do this.
Right? Let's do this.
Now or never. And so... so I signed up for this embodied feminine training, and I had just, for the first time in my life, realized that I loved my body. I definitely didn't know what my body was like as a woman at that point. I hadn't really explored that.
Right.
I really didn't know what I was signing up for in this embodied feminine, but I knew that I wanted to know more about how we can get and access in the body deeper like that, because I had this deep connection. I'm like, I want more. Isn't that it? You always want more of it.
Yeah.
And then we just kind of learn little by little how to always be in that.
How to integrate that.
How to integrate it, But if we could talk about a little bit about the embodied feminine training and how you kind of got to that point of teaching that and teaching the embodiment. And I know there's a lot more to that. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's aligned with what we've already been discussing to some degree. I feel like the journey of the embodied feminine has been a profound journey of self-trust for me, because my background of study has been through relatively masculine lenses. And what I mean is they were practices created for men, by men, and written in texts through the masculine lens. So, my background is in things like Taoism and Chinese medicine, Buddhism and yoga, and they've been incredibly valuable. I think we're all both masculine, feminine energies, more a way to describe that outside of kind of the gender role would just be yin and yang. I think we're kind of a combination of those things, and yet a lot of the practices that I had been exposed to were a little bit more on the yang side or the masculine side. And so what I mean by that is through the yogic lens, for example, we talk about Shiva and Shakti. And Shiva is the unpotentialized, formless spaciousness. It's that background of awareness that's holding and embracing and including all things. And then Shakti is everything inside of that. So it's the expression of that awareness through form. So a lot of the practices that I was exploring were a little more centered around, and also I got more into non-dual practices and meditation practices that were more centered around you are not the mind, you are this broader awareness. And yet, in my own experience, what was connecting me most deeply to that sense of truth and source and knowing, but also vibrancy and fullness and aliveness and love, were the practices that were through my body, that were allowing my body to surrender, and we'll get more into this, but to surrender more and more open, so that my mind was not necessarily directing the practice. In other words, I didn't have an idea, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D asanas in order to have A, B, C, and D effect. It was really just dropping into my body and letting my body move and unwind how it wanted to reveal its knowing to me from the inside out. I started exploring these kind of surrendered practices where what I was experiencing, a way to define it, would be that vast intelligence of consciousness expressing itself through form that's called Shakti was moving through my being. So in that way, that felt like a very feminine practice, and it wasn't being described to me. In the yoga that I was exposed to, and a lot of the systems I was exposed to, we were moving the body to get into a more sattvic state to be ready for seated meditation. And yet for me, the meditative experience was happening through the movement. The insight and clarity was coming through surrender to this energy that was moving and unwinding my body. And so that felt like a practice that I had to really develop trust around. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have people that were speaking to that or talking about that. I wasn't learning that in a book.
Yeah.
It was like, this was just happening from the inside out. My body was my teacher. And so that's where that path of like really learning to trust that. And then also, like we were just touching on, rather than my meditation just being about the development of equanimity, it was very much about developing heart-centered meditation, self-compassion, these what felt like more feminine qualities, you know. So there was this sense of really wanting to embody this surrender, this embodied surrender through movement, and this embodied daily practice of self-compassion. So that sort of started me off on this feminine path. And I got really curious, are there other people out there doing this, teaching this? Because when female lineages weren't written down, they were where they existed in small pockets. They were all oral traditions. It was hard to kind of find that anywhere outside of myself, which I guess is the beauty of it. It's a yin inside-out practice. But that's really how the feminine practices started, and then they evolved into many other things that we can talk about. But that's the birthing of it, is that inside-out flow.
And that was like so early on in my journey, and we can get into more of that as well a little bit later, but because I've been able to progress to experience that myself.
Yeah. But
maybe not necessarily, I wasn't understanding it as like the Shakti or the feminine. Yeah. I was understanding it in different ways.
Totally. And I think what's important at the end, like for me, those definitions were helpful to a point, and then they weren't. Then I needed to let go of it. It doesn't matter what it's called or what it is or what it's defined as. It's really just about the experience. But wanting to create some context for like, okay, this is to understand what this unwinding really was. So just to give a little more context to the experience that Brittany and I are talking about, I would come to the yoga mat, drop into my body, and let my body start to, I really would just be noticing, oh, there's some tension here. I'm going to bring some awareness there. What does that part of my body want to do? And it would start to unwind, and then it would bring me into another part, and then another part. And all of a sudden, it was like this dance, this unwinding. I call it embodied unwinding. And then inside of that, there would be a lot of emotional content, like all kind of emotional textures moving through. And a lot of memory and a lot of just this process of unraveling that would then eventually open to that portal of insight that we were touching on, and all of that kind of happening through the body. So I got curious, okay, if this is happening to me, are there other people exploring this, and what are they calling it? And that's when I met several different teachers. One of our teachers that we've both explored with, her name's Michaela Boehm. She teaches incredible work called Nonlinear Movement. And it's her way of exploring that is getting people just to rest on all fours and allow their bodies to start to move. And she'll describe it to some degree as trauma unwinding from the system. I've learned with other teachers, there's another system where the teacher describes it as the fluid inside, like under the skin line, moving and energy moving through the fluid, which I definitely relate to as a Yin Yoga teacher, understanding the fluid and the fascia, how the meridian pathways move through the fluid and the fascia. So we could just see it as kind of energy unwinding, the energy body unpacking. There are yogic systems that would talk about it as Kundalini. And what I noticed in my exploration looking for context was that each of those contexts, they have their own weight. Like when I was hearing people talking about Kundalini, I have mental associations with Kundalini that I was like, oh no, that wasn't something I wanted to explore. Whereas other people have a completely different narrative around Kundalini and are very comfortable with calling it that. So I think what I'm trying to express is that there are lots of people having very similar experiences, defining it as something different. And eventually those definitions can have association that can either be expanding or limiting. And ultimately they don't really matter. What matters is feeling safe enough and creating safe containers for ourselves or for others if we're wanting to be teachers, for people to be able to listen inside and trust that it's safe to let their bodies unpack and unwind in that way. It's really about, I think I was really looking for context for safety.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I was going to ask that because when I came to the mat in that training, I didn't feel safe in my body.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely a different experience from what I've experienced now. Yeah. But it was a very good, like, planting the seed, right? Because I was still able to drop in and start feeling the sensations of what's going on, but I wasn't able to allow the energy to really, I think maybe it happened like one time, like for a small moment in the training. But
I'm really curious because for me, it was a process over many years of meeting all the individual fears that were arising, what it was that I was afraid would happen if I surrendered to this place. You know, all the reasons that we attach to control, and because the safety that control gives us, and what it would take to give that up, to trust the unknown in that way. I think that's a very personal process. But I'm curious about what that was for you. Like, what would you say has allowed you to feel safer in your body in that journey? What's been have there been steps that you could track, or is it?
I would say there are a few steps that I could definitely track, and I'm sure there's been so much more because, I mean, you know, our journeys are so intricate and have so many pieces and so much unraveling. But I would say what I was doing is I was doing Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. Yeah. And so this was beginning of 2021, middle 2021. And so that's, you know, only a couple years ago. So when we were together, it was in 2018. And so I was like just starting to feel into my body. So a lot of things happened in between that. But what happened is I went to his retreat and I really didn't know much about him. To be honest, I'd only read his book, Becoming Supernatural, and was like, cool, I think this is the next step, just following my intuition. Yeah. And when I got there, he had started doing he does, what is it called? Blessing of the energy centers. So that's what he calls it, but you're basically tracking chakras or whatever you want to do, but the 7 energy centers in the body. Yeah. And he did it a new way where we were laying down while he was doing that. And so my yoga nidra, which I had done, I mean, I was introduced to that a little bit before my yoga training, my 200 hour, and then Simone introduced more, which we're going to talk to her on the podcast. Great. And then that was a deep practice for me. And then I went and studied it with Kamini Desai. So yoga nidra was like a huge healing practice for me. Me too. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. And also, so yoga nidra's sleep meditation. But it goes through the koshas, which are the different layers of the body, and it brings you into these brainwave healing states where your body can basically heal itself. Repair and release things that need to be let go.
Deeply nourishing for your nervous system. Definitely. Profoundly nourishing.
Definitely. And, you know, actually, to be honest, that in that training with Kamini, the 100-hour yoga nidra training, I did have some unwinding happen. My body moved itself through that. Because it's when I feel safe within the container, when I feel safe, like, with the teacher that is...
So that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah.
What do you think was present in that moment that allowed that safety for you?
I have to trust the people that are around me.
Yeah.
I have to really, because I actually had a conversation with somebody about this recently, and they were saying that at points, because, this is like sort of a tangent, so we'll try to keep it brief. But basically, when you're in those deeper states of healing, you could also potentially be in what the nervous system state is freeze, the dysregulated nervous system. But you could potentially hold both. Yeah. And so I'm really curious about that, and I haven't really dug into that much yet. But that's like definitely something I want to look at, because the freeze state is something I'm really noticing. Like, dissociation has been a huge part of my journey. Yeah. But even though that might have been...
And can I say, what an incredible job you're doing of bringing yourself back online.
Thank you.
Like, I've known you now for 5 years, and watching your journey through your body and developing that self-trust and developing that relationship with the body, and watching what you've been able to move through and hold and embrace and transmute, and it's such a beautiful thing to witness your journey, Brittany.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really want to acknowledge you. It takes courage, and you've been thriving on the journey.
Thank you. Yeah. And I've had incredible people like you to help guide me along the way, which is what I'm so excited to share on this podcast, is just all the different things that people could experience, the people that come into their lives, and but so safety in the room and in the container is definitely something. Yeah.
So it's like there's this external safety, what we would call in nervous system regulation work, this co-regulation. And then what allows that trust for you within yourself, do you think?
I believe I'm still learning that.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's been some transitions lately of noticing that I've really been needing the co-regulation, and that I can experience a deeper sense of self when I am having space held for me.
What a great thing to notice. Yeah.
And so just noticing that, and noticing when I am by myself, that maybe it's not as easy to kind of come back into my body.
And maybe that's your body's way of saying to you right now, this is exactly what you need. You know, like, how does it feel for you after, a session of embodied unwinding? How does it feel to you to be held? Do you like to be physically touched and held, or do you just like someone in the space with you? What feels right for you?
It's interesting along this journey. So I would say before the brain injury and everything, I didn't even want to be touched.
Right.
It was a really interesting, very
that makes sense with the disconnection from the body.
I didn't want anyone near me. Now anyone can hug me at any time. Right. Please just give me, and also the through the sensory proprioception, just that touch is so important.
Yeah, it's grounding. It brings you back here, right?
But that's not always available.
Right.
It's not always available for everyone. So things that I will do is sometimes I'll put pillows on myself. Yes. I know you have Hugsy.
So in our training we have a human-sized teddy bear that sits in the corner. And so, if you're moving through practices where there's vulnerability or fragility, or you just feel like a cuddle. I mean, we all feel like cuddles, right? Yeah. So if there's not a human to hold you, you can, or if you're not ready to be held by a human, but we also teach practices in the nervous system work of self-hugging is self-regulation with self-touch, but there's also Hugsy, human-sized teddy bear that you can go and give cuddles to. I highly recommend a human-sized teddy bear, available at all times.
It's actually interesting because, when I've been in the trainings, that wasn't, it didn't resonate with me. And then recently, I think I just had, sort of a breakthrough, and I was like, oh my God, this is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A really interesting experience. I was on a women's retreat a long time ago as a student, as a receiver. And we would, go through practices that brought up fragility, and then afterwards there was space for integration, which I loved. And there were little half an hour periods, and there was an invitation to either self-regulate, doing whatever you do, sitting, holding your heart, or being in nature, going for a walk, putting your bare feet on the ground, doing whatever you do to resource and regulate. Or you could co-regulate. You could co-regulate, meaning you could say to someone, which was scary, going, would you mind holding me? These very difficult things to say. And in the beginning of the retreat, I would say, I mean, I can't remember, this could be wrong, but let's just say about 80% of the room was self-regulating, and 20% were going, could we have a cuddle? And they probably had experience in that and felt more comfortable with it. By the end of the training, I would say 95% were co-regulating. And I think in the beginning there was just this like, oh no, I've got it. I'm good.
I also wouldn't have known. I would have been like, I don't know who you
yeah,
are.
exactly.
I'm not gonna ask
right.
You,
absolutely.
Like,
you're a stranger. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And over that week you create that sense of trust and safety with the other person, like you mentioned before. Absolutely. I think for me, as the student, there was definitely this sense of like, I don't think it's very socially acceptable to talk about our need for touch. I think there's a lot of loneliness and separation. I think that, that I felt personally to go and ask someone, would you mind? Could you, like, it felt like I was potentially being needy or clingy, and perhaps that was just my own personal attachment wounds, But as it very quickly normalized, like eventually when it was just okay to ask, then it started to feel like, why is it not okay to ask? Like, to be able to say, like, would you mind holding me? Yeah, could you hold me? And how would you like to be touched? I'd just like you to hold my hand, but sit looking that way so I don't feel, like it's not overwhelming. Okay, yeah, I'd love to do that for you.
And we've done some things like that in your training.
Absolutely, I incorporate it more and more now, and especially in the embodied feminine training now. Some people just want to lean back to back. They don't want to look in anybody's eyes, but they just want to feel the warmth of a mammal behind them. And their nervous system goes, I think I definitely overlooked just how important human touch and co-regulation is to nervous system regulation and healing, and I'm really into normalizing that. I studied and then now practice something called attunement therapy, which is exactly that. It can be done as a one-on-one therapy where for 90 minutes you're held. You're held in any way that you choose, and it's a container where you get to...
This sounds great. Where do I sign up?
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, on the... so we're including it on our nervous system regulation retreats now as well. So you lie on the heartbeat, and so meaning you lie on the chest of the practitioner, then you can hear the heartbeat, and it takes you back to that place of being inside the womb. And it's incredibly recalibrating for the nervous system. And so, I've done a lot of exploration in the power of touch for grounding and being here. Great for disassociation, like in small titrated, safe ways.
Yeah, it can't always be like full on.
30-second hug might be enough. Let's start there.
Or just a little like, like just...
side to side, like beep.
I think in one of the trainings, I was like, can you scoot back a little bit? I'm glad you're here, but like I need you to be a little farther away from me.
And how great is it to be able to communicate that?
Yeah.
I love that.
Like I don't need you to touch me, just you can witness, but from farther away.
But you know what's so beautiful about that is that spoken from self-attunement. A lot of people are not aware of that. That without your embodied awareness, there's a lot of people that would just be feeling weird and don't know why or how to ask for their needs. Or that's the beauty of embodiment, is that you can tune in and notice it doesn't feel good in my body for you to be that close.
And that's when the contraction happens.
Yes, that's right. I need you to be, I have a background in what's called somatic experiencing, and in our training, when we sit down to do a session with someone, we literally decide where our chairs should be. Should they be here? What about if I sit here? Oh yeah, that's much better. Oh no, that's too far away. What about here? Oh yeah, that's it. And the way you're tracking what feels comfortable for you is in the body, So the more aware we are of our bodies, the more self-aware we are in general. The body's such a barometer for our health and well-being, for the soul.
Word. That's what you said.
Hey,
the body's a barometer for the soul.
You knew it had come up at some point, the tagline.
There it is. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do people do, though, when they're dissociated?
Yeah. I mean, what did you do?
Yeah. I crashed into a wall.
Right.
And then I didn't have a choice but to figure it out and be back in my body. But that accident, took me so far out of my body that, I couldn't function. I couldn't, remember things. I couldn't, I just, was not available. Yeah. And so...
Tell me the role that yoga has played in, your gently coming back into the body in safe ways.
Well, when we talk about yoga, are we talking about asana? Are we talking about all of the,
Let's talk about asana or the physical side of the practice.
Okay, so the physical side of the practice. Well, if we go back to before the accident, I couldn't feel anything, so I was seeking sensory experiences.
Right.
So I was
extreme sensory experiences.
Like skydiving, trekking with gorillas, all these incredible experiences.
You literally jumped out of a plane.
A helicopter, actually.
Hey! That'll do it.
And so, which led me to the sledding accident, which is how I got my, my injury. But I couldn't feel anything, so those would make me feel. And so, but I had just climbed Kilimanjaro, and that was like June or July of 2017, and then my accident was of February of 2018. So I was doing like really intense like workouts. I was training hardcore. I was in the best shape of probably my life. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I hit this wall, literally, and can't do any of those things. I can't do any of them. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Right.
And so yoga people had tried to get me to go to yoga classes before, and I was so uninterested. It was slow. It was boring. Like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Yeah. Like, I want to be in a spin class, and I want to kickbox, and, do all those, like, really high cardio activities.
Yeah, makes sense, right?
And so then, like I said, it was the only option. It was literally the only thing I could do. Yeah. Because my heart rate I could manage it better. And so then just like by putting those earplugs in and connecting in, it was such a strange experience.
How beautiful.
And then I moved to Tanzania, was looking for yoga trainings, and I literally just Googled, and like Sosa came up.
So tell me about that. Why did it go from exploring practice to I want to go and do a training and go even deeper? What started working?
Did it work, or was I just trying to find what was next? I think it was a little bit of both.
Got it. You got on that trajectory
because everything had been taken away from me.
Yes.
Everything. And so I was like, who am I? What am I going to do? I didn't have my job anymore. I was starting a nonprofit in Tanzania, so that was very new. And I just like basically kind of lost my previous self. And so yoga kind of gave me something to anchor into.
A new direction.
Mm-hmm. And I went to, it was this beautiful studio that's no longer there called Inner Light Yoga. And it married two of my favorite things. It was yoga to music. And so they had incredible...
I don't know. Are you going to sing on your podcast at some point?
At some point I will, maybe.
She has an incredible voice. Brittany comes and sings at the end of my Yin Yoga trainings when people are in Shavasana.
Mm-hmm. It's been fantastic. So I don't know where I was. What was I saying?
You going to the teacher training and...
Oh, yeah. So Inner Light. So I went every single day. Every single day. And so it just gave me something to kind of anchor into while I was experiencing basically full-on breakdown and chaos in every other aspect.
And what started arriving through that daily practice?
More connection to my body.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to my breath and I was monitoring my heartbeat. Yeah.
And then I was tuning to its language.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, how can I know more of this?
Yeah.
And then that's what got me to Bali.
Got it.
And then
then we met. And the rest is history.
And then it's just been one thing after another. And the more and more that I attune, the more I can notice when I'm not in my body or not feeling safe or feeling contraction or also feeling expansion and feeling full-on connection.
Yeah. Amazing. I love it. Yeah, I think when people are disassociated, I think what's important is creating pathways that are aligned and attuned for them directly. So it's about that self-attunement of how to gently, slowly, in small little bites, safely come back into the body. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, life took you through extreme wake-ups to get to that place, but it sounds like there've been the steps. And for, if there are people out there experiencing disassociation, even just starting with things like, like some self-touch and gently attuning, like, oh, I have a body. I can feel sensation. It's here, just in little little bite-sized pieces. And I think what you touched on before about co-regulation is really important. If there has been disassociation for traumatic reasons, those traumatic reasons are valid, and the nervous system has been trying to keep you safe. And so to re-journey back through those spaces with somebody that you trust, with somebody that's literally helping to create a sense of safety for your nervous system to relax and unwind inside of. So, I think, for me personally, I think that from disassociation, embodiment practice is, I don't want to say essential, but
for you.
For me.
Yes, for you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
Because it's going to be different for everyone.
It's going to be different for everyone. However, I think the reason that I was leaning a little bit more onto that emphasis was because it's a nervous system dysregulation. If we look at top-down approaches, which is more a cognitive approach, talk therapy to unpack history, that is extremely effective. Something like IFS is extremely effective. But I think what we're starting to understand more and more now in nervous system exploration is that it's like a disease. It's happening in the body, meaning that if there's a dysregulation in the nervous system, it's the nervous system that has to be attended to. We're now including these bottom-up approaches. And at least in my experience, when I had a big dysregulation, it was the two things together, marrying together, the top-down and the bottom-up together, that really created that sense of both healing and integration. So, I feel like because disassociation is disembodiment, then safely coming back into the body, is a big part of the process.
And I think what I realized relatively recently is that because co-regulation didn't really come, like the word didn't really come in until probably the Yin training. I knew about it, but I didn't experience it so directly, which I'll say kind of what happened. But first, then I realized that that's literally what I've been doing. I've been going to all of these practitioners, all of these trainings to get co-regulation, to get the tools and knowledge that I need to self-regulate, but also to experience the co-regulation.
To experience compassionate support.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I feel like they're those two wings, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I was going to go back to when we were talking about the energy moving through us. When that fully happened, my mom was on the training with me. Right. And of course we all have different relationships with our parents.
Right.
And, that'll another conversation for another time.
That's a whole other conversation.
Do that one with my therapist.
Yeah.
But at least I had, it was a room of 2,000 people. Right. So I wouldn't have necessarily felt safe to allow that to happen. This is the Joe Dispenza course. Yeah. And so when that happened, though, she was with me, and so I could, and it felt like a relief. Oh my God, it's finally ready to move through.
What felt like a relief? What's finally ready to move through?
I had associated it with where we had talked about different, where we had to...
Should we pause and say that again? I don't know what that was.
Well, okay.
What was a relief? What was it that finally moved through?
It was like I had reached this point of allowing, I would say I probably associated what you said, the Shakti moving through, as more of a trauma release nervous system rebalance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what I feel like I was experiencing at that moment, where I was just I literally just sobbed afterwards. My body started moving itself, allowing the energy to move through, and I was just oh my God, thank you. Thank you. I've been working so hard for this, and I'm ready to allow all these experiences to integrate, to release, whatever that may be, but just...
So that sense of relief and gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? That always seems they go hand in hand, right? Or that in that process of healing, there's often this big swell of gratitude.
Oh my gosh.
Even gratitude for the whole uncomfortable process. Mm-hmm. For life, this journey, right?
And it just feels so expansive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and that your mum was there, that significance of that allowed a sense of safety and co-regulation that allowed for that to happen. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and then it kept unwinding.
Right.
You know, and
to this day.
Still unwinding to this day.
Yeah.
And where you talk about like that trust and like the safety, and I don't know that I've mastered that full surrender, because there's still a little bit of resistance and control of the experience, because when your body does start moving itself, you're a little bit like, what's happening, you know?
Yeah.
But then there are times when it feels very expansive afterwards, where it's just like, this is an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so we took a little pause there, and I wanted to go back to when we were talking about like dissociation and like things that maybe we could do when we're by ourselves to bring ourselves back in our body, and you were talking about kind of like squeezing and touching. And I think when I was in that Embodied Feminine course, and there were some really profound like tools that were available, and you had brought in somebody to teach the Arvigo Mayan abdominal massage, and I have a really long history of hating on my body and body shame, and especially when it comes to the belly, and so that's been a part that like definitely has needed some compassion and attention. And so that, like, learning that technique of doing like a self belly massage was so profound for me, of just like even just touching myself in that way, you know, and in that part of my body that's really sensitive.
So the thing is with our bodies is that they store our history, right? So they store things that have happened to us, the way we've experienced things that have happened to us, our behaviors, our patterns, our thoughts, our feelings. So there are specific practices in the Embodied Feminine program that go in and address the more feminine areas. So we store a lot in our bellies, we store a lot in our wombs, and in our reproductive organs. And so we explore what we call pelvic wellness, which is in the same way that with the Yin training, we're working with the fascia of the whole body, understanding that we store, you know, as we know from our own direct experience, right? You store tightness in your shoulders or in stress in your jaw, you know. So we start to, in the held trainings, we start to unpack where we store certain things and how to, how to work with that. So in the Embodied Feminine practices, we also explore internal practices, working with the inside of the pelvis, where women store a lot of their trauma. So the Arvigo technique that you were talking about, it's specifically about realigning the uterus in its position in the womb, because the uterus sits on kind of a sling and it can easily dislodge. It's designed that way so that we can have babies. But when it dislodges, it actually affects not only our physical body, it can create discomfort and pain, it can create hormonal imbalance, but it can also affect our sense of self. It can affect our mental and emotional, realities. So we learn these practices of kind of realigning. But while they're doing these deeper structural realignments and they're helping unpack the history from the tissue and all of these things, they're all just so, like you are experiencing, just wonderful ways to directly reconnect with your own body and to create sort of daily practices, ways that we can attune. In the nervous system regulation practices that we do on the upcoming nervous system regulation training, we learn very specific practices for disassociation, very specific practices for anxiety, very specific practices for rage and an incomplete fight response. So things that you can do, ways to work directly with the vagus nerve or directly with certain imbalances of the nervous system. And they're little practices.
Do you want to show us one?
Yeah, well, the vagus nerve moves up through the neck and up through the ears, so it's going to be a little difficult to do with the headphones on.
You can take them off for a moment.
Yeah? Okay, let's do that. So you can take your hands and separate your index finger and your middle finger. Just place those fingers either side of the ear. And then by gently massaging up and down the front and back of the ear. So there's a branch of the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve runs from your gut to your brain. And so it runs from the belly up through the neck and into the head. And there's an auricular branch, which means an ear branch, that extends into the ear. So here you're starting to massage the vagus nerve directly. And already this is chilling me out. So this is something I do really regularly, moment to moment. If I'm starting to feel a little anxious, a little stressed, then, just doing a practice like this helps me to calm and kind of land back in my body. So for disassociation, for example, when you start to notice that you're checking out, there's a practice that Peter Levine, are you aware of Peter Levine? He has a great practice called VU. So we could try that together if you want to.
Yeah, let's do it.
So placing your hands over your lower belly. If it feels comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. If that feels overwhelming at all, then just finding a soft gaze.
Or if you're listening while you're driving or something, please don't close your eyes.
Yeah, not a good idea. Actually, don't do this until you're not driving. And then taking a moment just to notice your belly. To the best of your capacity, see if you can drop down to an awareness of where your hands are touching your belly, maybe attuning to the sensation, even if it's not a strong sensation. It's a little awareness. And then starting to notice the breath. See if you can feel a little movement of the inhale and the exhale. And then in a moment together, we're going to take a breath in, and when we exhale, we'll make the sound V-O-O, VU. And we're going to let's do that 3 times just to get a sense of it. And you want to allow the vibration of the sound to emanate deep down in your belly, like you were sending the sound down into your deep abdomen. So let's try that together. Exhale the breath you're on. Take a nice deep breath into your hands, letting your belly fill and swell. Two more times, feeling the vibration in your belly. And just take a moment to notice the impact of that. And whenever you feel ready, opening the eyes or lifting your gaze. So it's a nice, simple practice that just helps, if there's some disassociation, just to ground you and bring you back into the moment. And there's all these little nervous system hacks, That's really what the nervous system regulation program is about. We learn how to teach yoga nidra, we learn how to teach restorative yoga, but it's really like a third of the training is really centered around learning all of these particular vagal toning practices to bring the nervous system back online. And they're great because you can use them moment to moment in your life.
It's interesting. So the VUing that we just did, and talking about co-regulation earlier. So when I came to the Yin teacher training, which was just this past year in 2022, something everybody kept telling me, like, there's something, or like this intuition was like, there's something that I need from Tina. I don't know what it is, but there's something, because like I didn't practice Yin. Really, I did it, and the Yin. So I was kind of like, I could learn Yin, I could learn to teach Yin. That's sure, it's
I
great.
could do that.
Like, but there's something about like the way that you teach, the dropping into the body, but I really think the most profound moment. So right before I came on the training, I was in another accident, and it was on the same side of my body. It was a motorbike accident here in Bali. I burned my leg. It got infected. And so then I couldn't really actually do most of the yoga.
Well, couldn't you though?
Why?
I mean, the way that you practiced the yoga, I think, was profound.
Yeah.
And very self-tuned. Like, it feels like these injuries or impediments are such gifts for your internal listening, because you had to stay so connected to where am I at? Is this still, am I, which is, I mean, that's such a gift.
Yeah, and that's really been the track record of all the accidents. That's when I start moving too quickly and I move out of like the stillness and attunement, and then it's just like, because I like to move at a quick pace.
Right.
And the universe is telling me, but that's not the pace.
Yeah, I was going to say, which part of you likes to move?
My old self. I don't know what part.
Maybe not your body.
Not my body.
Who knows?
Yeah. And so But so when I came to that training, and then I was having these moments of like full on, so it had basically re-triggered, I believe, this is the story, right? It had re-triggered everything that was left from that initial accident.
Yeah.
Because it was on the same side of the body. I'd done this whole like 6-year journey.
It's like, let's revisit that and
let's revisit
pull up the last bit of the...
Yeah. And so, which was pretty traumatic, to be honest.
Yeah, of course.
And so I was very grateful to have a safe container to be within in that moment, and to like have the option to go back into my body again, you know? But I think one of the most profound things was when I was experiencing like full on like dissociation, which I didn't know that's what that was. You kind of pulled me over. I was like, would you like to do a few exercises? Yeah. And I was like, I guess, but maybe I could just go sleep.
Can I just go get a snack?
Can I just go lay down? I think I need to go lay down, do some meditation. You're like, no, let's go do some things. And so we did, and we sat down, and you did the VUing with me, and you were holding that space for me to be able to come back into my body, and I did. And it was like, holy shit.
It works.
I was like, whoa. But I think what was so profound about it was that not only that it happened, but I had been associating what was happening to me in those moments, because it happened quite a bit throughout life, of it being a result of my brain injury. So I was attaching to, oh my God, I've got to go lay down, do a yoga nidra, I need to like... And I was putting myself in these freeze states that was just perpetuating the same...
And yet there was disassociation way before the accident.
But it's just now coming into like a very... I think because I am in my body more, it's a more noticeable happening when it happens.
I want to just share with the listeners as well, because of Brittany's physical injuries on the training and her willingness to just kind of go in anyway and journey, Brittany discovered, I'd really love to hear more about your internal experience, a way of practicing where there was, obvious limitation to mobility and movement and things that she could and couldn't do physically, but you were doing the practice mentally with visualization. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the thought kind of came from Dr. Joe Dispenza. Yeah. He, in his retreats, he talks about, or in his books somewhere, he talks about these studies of people playing the piano. And like 2 groups did it. One group actually went and like practiced the piano every day. And then one group just mentally played the piano. Yeah. And they came back and they basically had the same results.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so I can't do these morning practices, but I'm here. Yeah. So like, what can I do? And I would practice them in my mind. And because of the way that you teach, and it's so like, it's such an easy way for me to like be embodied. Yeah. I could really like, I knew what to do as you were guiding it.
Yeah, so even though you were mentally doing it, you were still tracking it as a felt sense in the body.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the point.
And then when I was tracking that, I was having full waves of love. Like
totally.
I was just having this ecstasy of like joy, especially.
And your body was releasing in certain ways and opening in areas, and all with this internal movement of energy.
So really, we don't have to do anything. We can just sit there and do it.
I mean, I think what's so beautiful about that is to get a sense that embodiment doesn't have to mean movement. It doesn't have to mean, like, you can do it at any stage, in any way. Like, you can be injured. You could be in hospital. You could be elderly and incapacitated. You could be, menstruating and not be wanting to move. You could be. There are ways of being in the body in these incredibly safe and powerful and transformative ways that don't require strength or movement or agility or any of those things. Like, often I think we equate embodiment with exercise and movement, and that's not necessarily entirely the case.
Right? Yeah. And it was it was really a beautiful experience.
Yeah. It was a beautiful experience to witness.
Yeah. Just me, just sitting on the mat, like,
having
a
moment.
Every time we would come up into like for the sun salutation, and you would just like raising your arms, and I was just, I don't think I did it because I was doing it in my mind. I could have, of course, raised my arms, but I think I was just like imagining them just being like, just so open, and it just like rushes of, energetic.
The impact our mind has on our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mind-body connection.
Yeah, mind-body-spirit connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the mind-body-spirit connection is really the basis of everything that I'm teaching. And it kind of, the way that I have taught over the years, I've been teaching for over 22 years, and it's evolved. And so the courses that I offer, the programs that I offer, are kind of an echo of that evolution. So when I first started, as I mentioned, exploring the mind-body connection, I was looking at systems. So one of the most efficient maps of the mind-body connection that I found in my inquiry was the Chinese medicine system, because it speaks directly to the hundreds of thousands of meridians that make up the energy body, and how to work with them directly, and how these meridian pathways are what connect your mental body, emotional body, intuitive bodies to the physical body, and how we can work with the channels. And then I found a yoga therapy program, a 2-year full-time yoga therapy program, which taught me the foundation of how to work with meridians inside of movement and yoga. So that became like the foundational structure. And it was so beautiful, that practice for me, because for many years, it was an outside-in practice, but it birthed very direct experience.
What do you mean by outside-in?
I mean, I would learn, this is your liver meridian. These are the postures you can do to work with your liver meridian. The liver, I would learn cognitively, is where we store anger and suppression that leads to judgment, that leads to control, that, I would learn these things. And so then for an entire period of spring, the whole season of spring, which relates to the wood element, the liver channel, I would do yoga for the liver. And so, I was outside in, I was learning where they were, I was learning the practices, I was learning what to do, I was learning what it was about. But then I was on the mat every day doing that, and we did it for 2 years. So we went through all of the seasons, which meant that inside the postures, I started to have these very direct experiences of like, whoa, okay, just like, you did the VU, and also like, you're like, whoa, it really works. So I started learning what the liver meridian was for me, and what the wood element was for me, and what was, was stored in my body, in the groin and the inner thighs, and that, But at that stage of the practice, I was able to therefore not just get on the yoga mat and do a downward dog and not know what I was doing. I could direct it, I could have reason and structure and purpose and intention. But what was happening is I was bringing a lot up to the surface, right? Mm-hmm. Bringing a lot up to the surface, and I not yet developed the tools to be with what was arising. It was like, okay, I'm just feeling quite emotional and a little overwhelmed, and I wasn't really sourcing that place of clarity. I wasn't yet anchoring into that place of self that we talked about before, that then could go in and integrate, all of those things. So then eventually I came across Yin Yoga. So that style of practice, that original style, I call yoga therapy. And I teach people that system, the yoga therapy system of working with the meridians, learning the system to work with their bodies. But then the Yin Yoga practice goes deeper. Then it's like, okay. So now you've got 5 minutes to sit with your liver channel. And
Can you explain a little bit about what Yin is? We've talked a lot about it through
this, okay, good idea. Great. So Yin Yoga is a style of yoga when you're in a posture for 5 minutes, and it accesses deeper tissue in the body. So rather than actively stretching a muscle like a regular yoga asana, you're surrendering your entire body to gravity inside a certain shape. So it's really about letting go, letting go, letting go. And as your body drops deeper and deeper in the postures, you're getting into a deeper tissue called fascia that starts to unwind. And it's recognized now that, and learn from your own direct experience, that it's within the fascia that we store a lot of our, our mental, emotional content.
Connective tissue.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I'm just assuming these things, right? Yeah. So yes. So fascia is this connective tissue that connects everything to everything else. It's like an internal stocking in the body. And when you're in these postures, it starts to create space and openness. So in the same way you stretch a muscle, this creates even deeper movement, internal movement and flexibility. So inside of that, you're in a posture for 5 minutes, and you've got nowhere to go. You can't distract yourself, or, you can try, but if you've got, a teacher like me in the room, I'd be like, come back. And what's happening now? And now. So the invitation is for these little spaces of, as you're working with the energy body and the deeper tissue and things are coming to the surface, then is, how do I be with that? How do I be with what arises? So that's when we start to explore the mindfulness practices, the 2 wings of presence, how to hold and embrace what's there and start to notice the reactions in the mind, how to be empowered with choice in the face of what's happening in your mind, where you can, first of all, be aware of your reactions and then work with them in a way that creates space and for transformation. So, so that's what happened in my life. And then that's the way that I teach. So there's the yoga therapy and then the Yin Yoga. And then there's the embodied mindfulness, which is going into that even deeper. So that's when, rather than creating a structured practice, just like we've talked about, rather than going, okay, I'm going to sit down and do liver postures, I sit down and ask the body, what does the body want to do today? And the body will start to unwind. So the evolution of going from structure to surrender. And then, the embodied mindfulness training is all about that and exploring that. And as well as starting to incorporate more Buddhist psychology and more other ways of being with what arises. Yeah. And
what do you mean by being with what arises?
I mean that if I'm inside a practice and a whole lot of stored anger comes up, where we all of a sudden just might feel incredible amounts of overwhelming rage, what the hell do I do with that?
Yeah.
Right?
What do you do with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I, first of all, anchor into a part that's aware of that rather than it's just totally identified as the anger? How do I settle into the part that's able to be with the anger? And then what are the tools that I could use? What are the self-compassionate tools that I could use? What are the inquiry tools that I could be with that part of myself? What's making you so angry? That must be really hard. Being curious about that part and what it needs to, to integrate. How to move anger through the body. Like when the nervous system is needing an incomplete fight response to move through the body. Some push hand practice. There's specific practices, somatic experiencing practices that are helpful in moving it through the body. Like how to be with these things.
Well, and anger's such a tricky one, too.
Isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
It's because it's so overwhelming. Fear and anger. And I mean all of them. Grief and shame and pick one, right? But anger's a big one.
Speaking for me, anger. I hear that. Has been more of a tough one to be in.
Yeah. And also because, all of these really have their place. And I think that's what's so important about embodiment is it's not like, oh, anger's arising, anger's bad. We need to do something with that to get rid of that. Like often anger arises as part of the healing, like the parts that have not stood up for themselves or not expressed themselves or not taken up space or not, the suppressed shadowed parts come up and they're like, I'm here, I have a voice and my voice matters. And we move away from being suppressed and abused to being empowered through the energy of anger. Like it's about learning how to really attune to what the anger is. Is it just a reaction from control or needing to, or is it an expansion or how to work with these things? It gets more and more subtle as your embodiment journey moves along,
Yeah, and that's one of the very first things that you did with us in the 200 hour, like in the very first time we met was, sitting with different emotions and seeing how the expansion and contraction feel within your body.
Yeah, because often we don't even notice. If I sort of say to someone, if I say to someone, feel a memory of anger, how are you feeling? And, they might start to say, oh, I'm just feeling really, be inside the story. And where are you noticing that in your body? And at first, people are often like, what do you mean? Well, I'm noticing that it's not okay. They were like, yeah, I totally get that. And are you noticing something in your stomach or or like, well, I'm just feeling really angry. It's like, what does that feel like? Like, it can take a little while for us to register, oh, my fists are actually clenched. My jaw is clenched. I can feel like a tightness underneath my scapula. In fact, the back of my heart is closing and I'm like taking up space with my chest. Like we start to notice these things. And because we store the triggers in the body, then we can be like, oh, what happens if I just bring presence to where that's happening in the shoulders? And if that softens, what happens? And often underneath that will be, actually, there's some sadness under that. What's under that? There's some vulnerability. I'm afraid. And the body helps, the awareness of the body helps to unpack the deeper story than, just the shells or the reactions on top. There are all these parts that come online to protect these, what in IFS we call the exiles, right? Like the more vulnerable parts, all these protective parts come online, and we just get to know each of them through the body in this way till we get back to holding the original wound.
And I think, that's so beautiful. And I think that the Yin Yoga practice and doing the Yin teacher training was so important for me at that point, because it is being with what arises, but allowing the window of tolerance to expand.
That's right.
Allowing for
the
uncomfortableness of some of these feelings that I've experienced to just be with them.
Yeah.
Whereas normally I would just jump out of my body or go to a workout, or you can do that as a way to express, but try to avoid or get away from it. You know?
Absolutely. That's so true. That's one of the greatest gifts, I think, of Yin Yoga, is the embodied mindfulness aspect, because we need to feel to heal. It's a cliche because it's true, right? All the nervous system regulation practices happen through the body, but we disassociate because it's overwhelming to be in the body. It's overwhelming to be with those things in that moment. And so our body, it's designed for our survival. A freeze response is intelligence of the body. But then we learn to slowly come back in. And we do that by creating moments of going, actually, I can be with this really intense sensation. I'm still alive. I'm okay. I'm still here. That was a really intense 5 minutes in that pigeon pose that was opening stuff in my hip. It was really intense to be with that. But I was able to be with that, and I'm here. And next time, I know I can be with that. I'm building a sense of safety and self-trust and trust in the experience, the process. I can be there a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And the beauty of Yin is that, exactly as you described, it allows us to get more comfortable in the realm of the uncomfortable. It's empowering because it shows us our capacity. It shows us that we can be with so much more than we think we can. And that, there is an inherent movement of the nervous system for our protection to get the hell out of there, fight or flight. It's I'm out, and that's useful to a degree. And then at some point we need to come back in and actually be there, and then we can move it through the nervous system. And then we have resilience. We have life flexibility. We don't have to limit ourselves to, I can only do this and this and this because otherwise I can't cope. We develop slowly over time the capacity to be with more and more, and to know our inner resources, and to trust ourselves, and to, without overwhelming or blasting the system, to do it in the ways that actually work.
Yeah, I was going to go... Shoot, the question just kind of left my mind.
It happens, right?
Yeah.
When you're speaking as well, so many things will come up.
I want to say that, and that, and
that. I know, right?
Okay, this is where I kind of wanted to go with that. So when you're in that place, so you're holding a pose for an extended period of time, I wouldn't have been able to do that necessarily when we first met. I did.
Absolutely.
But I don't believe I was as fully present of the sensations. I probably didn't feel as safe within my body. Yeah. So as people are maybe experiencing this, part of what you do so beautifully when you're teaching it is incorporating the mindfulness, is incorporating can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, there's two things I want to say to that. Yeah. So first of all, I'll speak to that direct process. And then I also want to talk about the evolution even of that for me that happened through my own trauma dysregulation. Okay. So in the Yin classroom, the way that I work with it is really about self-awareness, like really cultivating moment-to-moment self-awareness, what's happening now and what's happening now. And potentially you notice that the mind behaves in pretty predictable ways. You might be noticing da-da-da-da-da. So for example, if you're inside a really uncomfortable Yin Yoga posture, well, you're inside a Yin Yoga posture and discomfort is arising, then, you're meeting a part of your body that feels tight or stuck, and it's challenging to be there. Then what we start to notice is what in Buddhism they refer to as aversion. So this feeling of like, oh, I want to shift, I want to move, I don't want to sit with it, like I want to get out of here, you know.
I had that last night in class.
Right. I mean, yeah, we all do. That's the point, is that these are predictable movements of mind that everybody in the room is experiencing. They don't go away. We're just like, oh, there's aversion, my old friend, come on in, you know, like, so yeah, we're designed to, if you put your hand in the fire, it's going to burn, so don't put your hand in the fire. Like, that's part of our wiring to keep us alive, but it becomes overarching, and then it doesn't allow us to, you know, be able to be in emotional fires, or to go back into places of stuckness where becoming more curious about them and to be able to be with them is where healing happens, right? So we're inside a challenging physical sensation, and I start to just bring attention to what's happening in people's minds. Is there a desire to move, shift, and fidget? And people are like, is she in my head? It's like,
sure is happening.
Yeah,
right now.
That's a human experience. And so, you know, if you're not shifting or moving, perhaps the mind starts to go, oh, how much longer? I think we've been in it for about a minute. We've got about 3 minutes. Oh, God, can I... You know, we start to track time, or the mind will start to, you know, just distract. Just think about something else so I don't have to be here feeling this. So we notice aversion. And then other ways that we, you know, either it's the flight, let's get out of here, or the fight. The mind starts to go into judgment, complaint, and preference. I hate this posture. Oh my God, that person beside me, oh, their smell. I can't. And it's this blanket, it's moldy, you know, like lots of complaint. Or just like, oh, I hate this pose, I hate this part of my body. Why am I here? I hate Yin Yoga. Like the stories, you know. Totally normal.
And how often do we experience those things in everyday life?
Everyday life. Know? What's happening on the mat is just a mirror of, it's just noticing aversion. It's just reactivity to what's comfortable and challenging when we're triggered. So it's so useful to be able to be like, oh, I can see aversion. I'm not aversion. I can see aversion arising within me. And from that position of being able to see it, we start to slowly recognize, oh, I have some choice in that. I have some agency. And I can go, I can't make that not come. You can't stop the mind. You can't stop whatever arises. But you can be with it with much more capacity than we think we can, you know. We can be like, oh, there's my old friend aversion, you know, you're welcome to be here. But, you know, we're good. I'm here, you know. It's bringing our awareness back into the position of that which is noticing, that which is feeling the breath, that which is anchored in the body, while noticing all the thoughts. And that all of a sudden just creates all of this space. And you can sit in that part and then start incorporating those two wings. I can be in that place of presence that's allowing those thoughts to come and to go. I'm not attaching to them and making them who I am. But I'm also being really kind with myself. Like, yeah, I hear you. Thanks for trying to keep me safe. This is tough. This is hard. But, you know, we've got this. And sending some love to your experience. And, like, it trains us up how to hold those little 5-minute windows, trains us up how to hold ourselves in places of discomfort. And it radically expands our window of tolerance, our capacity to be with sensation. And what we start to notice, similar to what we notice in the Vipassana practices when there are seated meditations in retreats, is that, you know, you'll hear this quote often that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And it meaning that the sensation is there. And how we experience that sensation, there's some flexibility around that. And the more that we have resistance to the sensation and complaint and aversion, and we're just increasing our suffering, but that we can learn to be with that sensation in a way that we take off all those layers of invasion or interference, and then it's just awareness and compassion and sensation. And that's a very different story, and that's where healing and transformation starts to happen in that.
And it may take a while to get to that point.
Oh, God, absolutely. It may take a while, and that leads, great segue, because that leads me to my next point, is that, you know, in the trauma world, we talk about big T's and little T's. So in little T's, so big T's and little T's stands for little traumas and big traumas, right? So if there are smaller traumas, then, you know, we can build our window of capacity around them, and depending on the impact or the trigger, one day, I got it, the next day, totally don't have this, you know, like, so it's not linear. even though it can be to some degree, it's also, the life journey. But in my own direct experience, I had been doing that work for a very long time. And then I experienced some pretty significant back-to-back traumas that involved me witnessing some pretty violent deaths and experiencing deaths of very close loved ones and going through some pretty severe personal crisis. And I had a very intense nervous system dysregulation where I developed anxiety disorder and panic attacks that made me that rendered me non-functioning for a little while. It was kind of like riding a bike into a wall where life was like, okay, we're stopping now. We need to really attend to this. And it was very challenging for me because the tools in my tool belt that I had to that point of, okay, let's just sit and be with this. My nervous system was so dysregulated that I couldn't. And that was very scary for me because, it just pulled out the foundation and I didn't have a resource that I could be with. It was outside of my window of tolerance. And then I'm like, well, then what have I got? What have I got now? And that was grace. Didn't feel like at the time because grace has claws sometimes. But that was grace kind of going, okay, we've done all this little T work. Now we're going to go into some big T's and we're going to lay a deeper foundation. Yeah. And that's when I met incredible trauma therapists and I started learning much more about the nervous system. And I worked very directly. I worked with my IFS therapist 3 times a week in the beginning. I was working with my somatic experiencing therapist. I was learning all of the vagal toning stuff, like doing all the things. I had incredible support. I managed to bring myself...
Co-regulation.
Incredible co-regulation. And then managed to bring myself back into balance. Also had, family support, incredible friend support. Managed to get back to a place of stability, and then that then encouraged me to do even deeper work. And I had these new tools that I was adding to my old tools of being able to go, deeper. And again, I think that's like it's a never-ending journey. But and that, being me, that then birthed a whole new direction with my work. I always want to teach from a place that's really alive in me and what I'm really passionate about. And now what I'm really passionate about is what I learned in that time. It's like, we are living in a time of significant global collective trauma. Like never before has it been more important to know how to regulate our nervous systems, right? And so my faculties, in the same way that in your podcast you're bringing on the people that have been the people that supported you on your journey, it's the same with my faculties. Like in my trauma trainings and my nervous system regulation trainings, my faculty, so it's me and the therapist that supported me on my journey. So it's very personal, profound work for me, and and I speak about that just to say that this idea of, now I've got this. I've been doing Yin Yoga for 10 years and now I'm it's like,
here's another chance.
Here's
to
life.
See something else.
That's right, exactly. Here's life, and to trust that life is always serving us, even though it might not feel like it, so often. Yeah. And that there's always something in there, and it might take a little while and a whole lot of support and courage, and but we get there, and then we have new tools that take us deeper and also can take others deeper. We can support others with more capacity and compassion.
And I do feel really privileged in my own journey of having the access to be able to do all of that. People may not necessarily be able to access all of the things that we accessed and, do it as I don't want to say quickly because it wasn't quick, but I had consistent support.
Yeah. That's so true, right? I mean, therapy can be expensive, So I think that's why it's so important to learn these kind of tools that can support you for self-regulation, because co-regulation is so useful. And I'm very grateful, as I hear that you are, that we've had that support. But not everybody does, and there are ways to, to show up for yourself. There are self-regulating techniques and self-compassion techniques and things that you can learn, and things that, that both of us will be offering, where people can support and hold themselves and hold the people that they love in their lives that don't have access to to therapy. Yeah.
I did want to ask you, what did you notice that shift from how you taught before and then you had this experience and now how you teach now?
Love.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's so beautiful about what you're doing here is love. That was the really, I mean, there were, of course, there's lots of things that's overarching, but I learned to work with the nervous system with more specificity. But really, in terms of the way I was holding myself and holding what was arising, it was really strengthening up the compassionate wing. You know, they call the vagus nerve the compassion nerve. It's another word for it.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, and the way that it, you know, that what happens in the brain, how it integrates with empathy. And so, yeah, for me, my nervous system, in the same way you have a crying baby, you're not going to sit with a crying baby, or I wouldn't sit with a crying baby and, you know, just tell them to watch their mind, you know, just be present. You pick them up and you swaddle them and wrap them and contain them and soothe them and sing to them. And, you know, like there's vibration, neuromodulation, you know, the nervous system, it's a mammal. Like it's it's the body, and the body, my body, radically heals through love. You know, I think we come into the world needing to be held.
Yeah.
And it's holding ourselves and each other with love that creates well-being and thriving, and it's the separation and isolation like we've experienced like never before.
Right.
That, like, you know.
And not just like relational love. We're talking about like
All of it.
All,
global community.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Self-love. I mean, the way that we speak to the voice in our head, the way that you know, like
constant practice for me.
Constant practice. But like, you know, rather than just watching the voice in the head, being aware of it, self-compassion, how to transmute that with love, how to transmute the body and the nervous system with loving touch, how to offer the loving wing. I think that was the biggest recognition for me. Even though I was aware of that before and working with that to a degree, I had to amp that baby up. Like, you know, that was the big piece, I think.
And I think what's so interesting about all the work that you do and like the practices of embodiment, it's not only that we're coming into our body, but when we come into our body, we come into like different brainwave states that are like more healing and more relaxing and allowing for us to get deeper into those thoughts. Because I'm sure I'll say this a million times on this podcast journey, but Dr. Joe says that 95, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. I don't know where the reference comes from, but 95% of our thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. Right. So, like, if we're just working with the same 95% of thoughts every day, of course things won't change unless we drop into our body, unless
and the conscious and the subconscious, that, you know, we're not even aware of the subconscious stuff that's in there, right?
Right. And so shifting through these embodiment practices and allowing those brainwaves to slow down, come into these deeper states of healing so that your body can heal, so that you can recognize, sit with the thoughts, you know, and allow them to come forward so that you can shift them.
100%. Yeah, I feel like
you can sit with them and shift them. You know? Yeah.
In the embodied practice through the body.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that, you know, in a way, an embodiment practice is twofold. One is that the body is this direct portal to presence. You know, when I'm aware of the sensations in my body, they're happening now. Then the breath is happening now, like it's not before or future, past or future. There's this sense of, it brings you into the present, and it's by the present moment that we, you know, shift these brainwave states. And of course, there are other ways to do that, but the body's just a really effective way for presence for me. And then inside of that embodied presence, then we can start to tap into the subconscious and where it's stored in the tissue, and we can anchor into presence and be with that. You know, it just keeps going deeper. But for me and in the world of health, like the stuff that I teach is through the body, you know, in the body, of the body, through the body. That's what I love.
I love it too, obviously.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back. So you had spoken a little bit to the traditional Chinese medicine and that being your background. I don't know that we paired that with the Yin Yoga. Can we just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So it's working with the meridian pathways. There are 12 primary channels in Yin Yoga that feed into the 12 organ systems. So the Chinese system works with those organ systems and divides them into the 5 elements. And it's a Taoist practice. It's really recognizing that the cycles that move through nature move through us, and how we can kind of attune to our own cycles working with this particular system. And it's recognized that these meridian pathways conduct their life force through the fluid in the connective tissue, in the fascia. So in Yin Yoga, you work with specific areas of fascia connective tissue in a certain posture or asana, and therefore you're working with a specific channel that feeds into a specific organ. So you can create your practice to be quite intentional. Do a practice to recharge, reboot the energy in the kidneys if you're exhausted or run down, or a detox practice working with the liver, or a lung practice if you've been experiencing grief or loss, or these kinds of things. So this kind of creates this container. We have this structure that we can work inside of, but then it's all just you and you. Then it's like inside the posture while you're working with that. That meridian, that organ, that area of tissue, then, what's stored in that part of your body arises, and then there's the mindfulness practice of being with that. And that's how they kind of come together, because the Yin practice very specifically works with that system, the Chinese system.
Yeah, and what I've also noticed is that when I'm working with that system, whether it's like I need to work with the wood element, or I need to work with the kidneys, or whatever that may be for me in that time, what I've been noticing is also then the energy starts moving through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that just another, what do you do with that?
So describe a little bit more about what you mean.
So when I was in saddle pose, so I was sitting on my knees, leaning backwards, and I could feel the fascia was so tight, and so my body starts this quiver of the energy starts moving through, it's trying to release something. There's something that's stuck that needs to be allowed to move through the body. Do you just sit with that? Is that the practice? Is that the practice of surrendering, or do you? I don't know. Yeah. It's kind of because it's all about stillness.
That's right. This is when it gets interesting in terms of, how we were saying, now I use these terms of yin or yang, or masculine and feminine more loosely. But this is where I would talk about that a little bit more, because there are two ways of addressing that. The more masculine way, which is the Yin Yoga practice to some degree. This is the beauty about talking about yin and yang, is they're relative terms. So you're inside a yin practice talking about a yang perspective. So basically what I'm talking about is, how we touched on before, where I said there's Shiva and Shakti. Shiva as the all-encompassing, embracing awareness, and Shakti is the energy that's moving, formless in form. So the more masculine lens would be to sit as the container. Okay. The expanding the window of tolerance, sitting as the witness, or a girlfriend of mine, through a lot of conversations just like this, actually have shifted it to witness rather than witness, because it's a little less disassociated, a little more being with it, but it's still, that resting in awareness. And like Vipassana, being in the body with the body, but resting as the awareness, so that it just comes and goes, and you're just watching the impermanent fluctuations. That's one approach. That's the Yin Yoga approach. Whereas the Embodied Unwinding approach, I would call the more feminine practice, the more Shakti-style practice, because it's more about receptivity and surrender. So again, these are loose terms, masculine, it doesn't really matter. But the experience is different. And the experience is that you're in saddle pose, and the energy starts to move through the front line. And maybe your body wants to open, and the neck wants to unwind, and then it takes you into another. And you're following that current. You're following that unwind. And so there's a surrender to that energy, rather than being the container that's holding and allowing internal movement much more subtly. Yeah. So one is kind of this merging with the intelligence of the energy that's moving and allowing that to reveal and heal, or resting as the intelligence of the all-embracing awareness that's allowing that to be the source of healing, and then the body held in that shifts and changes, and and they both are incredibly powerful practices, and just different wings, perhaps different
Just different
ways to skin a
approaches.
cat.
Yeah. But don't be doing that.
Don't be doing that. Who are we to say, Brittany?
Oh my, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So that's just it's something that I've kind of, because I feel like there's a little bit of fear in me. Like I was saying, I'm still trying to control the outcome.
I get that.
You know, and of going into, because I find that my body starts wanting to move when I'm in like yoga class, like going to like a flow class or a yin class or whatever that is. When I'm in a stagnant posture, my body's like, no way, like let's just start. We know what we're doing.
I mean, my body sometimes wants to do it in the supermarket.
Yeah.
You know, or certainly when I'm dancing or making love, or there's these, you know, areas in my life where there is an invitation to surrender, then like.
And so what do you do with that?
Well, so I did a Vipassana retreat. I don't know if I should say this on a podcast.
Yes,
I don't know.
go for it.
I'm going to give myself permission. Because that's what it was really about, actually. It was a bit of a reclamation for me. And it was a reclamation of my self-trust. And for me, in that moment, it felt like a reclamation of this feminine way of because that's how I was defining it in the moment. But I was in a Vipassana retreat, and I had just prior to that, I'd been doing a lot of embodied unwinding, like a lot of surrendering, and I was having, just such incredible experiences of unwind and clarity and insight. And, I would do a practice and then just write for hours, and then, think so much integration and alignment, and it was incredible. And I came from that space, and I booked my Vipassana 6 months earlier. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do my Vipassana, but that's not what was happening in the moment. What was happening was the opposite experience, and more like we just spoke about the kind of feminine, masculine experiences. I was in the other. So then I went to Vipassana, and I was sitting there, and, this Vipassana retreat was all about austerity, and it has its values and its intentions and its reasons. But in that time, I was so in that feminine current that I was being inspired and opened by beauty and by sensory, and we were being told we were lying on wooden pillows with no mattress, on a wooden mattress, to, expand our capacity for resilience, like different intentions,
right.
Whereas I would have been so nurtured and nourished and deeply fueled and healed by the nourishment of lying on a flower bed at that time, like silk and satin. And, because it was opening this love and surrender and receptivity. It's just a different lens. So anyway, I'm sitting inside the hall doing my 10 hours a day of sitting, and luckily it was a Vipassana in Thailand, where in Thailand it's slightly different. You can walk for an hour, do walking meditation, and sit for an hour. So there was already a little more movement, a little more body involved in it. But I would sit there, and because that was moving so strongly in me, it was a really beautiful exploration. I was like, I'm going to reclaim this. I'm going to be here inside of this, masculine system, because it was being taught. There's a male Buddhist teacher sitting at the front in his robes doing his, and please don't get me wrong, such incredible value. It's just there's yin and yang.
And it's where you're at in your journey.
That's right.
It's where you are personally.
That's so true.
Yeah.
In that very moment, And I'm sitting in the front of my chair. And then, because
I moved to the fort,
it was beautiful. Yeah. And so I would just sit, but rather than, just watching my mind, I would just allow this energy to move, but it was so subtle. It would unwind my shoulder in this subtle way, and then move into the back of my heart, and then move somewhere. And I was just in that for 10 days, and it was bliss.
Wow.
And that was so exactly what I needed, rather than, the other style of meditation in that moment. So, and then I would also I was walking in nature, and I was just receiving the profound gifts of nature, of beauty, of Shakti,
and it becomes
form,
so much
not
more
just
vibrant
awareness
as well. That's been my experience.
Yeah. So there was just kind of this reclamation of that part of me being not only valid, but really my pathway, and owning that and stepping into that more fully, and being this isn't about getting it right or doing what I'm told or somebody else's way being my way. This is about what actually opens me, what actually brings me deeper into love, what actually aligns me with my knowing, what I know to be true, not what I've been conditioned to think. And often that's just through the lens of my own misinterpretation. How often do we read a text or read a book and we read it 5 years later and we're like, my God, I feel reading it for the first time, because we're reading through a lens. We're constantly interpreting wisdom. And that's such a flawed effort. Whereas this is a direct line to, to truth. And I'm just so passionate about connecting to that direct line and encouraging others to do that. You know?
There's so much emphasis, I feel like, in this world that we live in on words. Yeah. And the words they can't describe that truth.
Yeah, they're a finger pointing to the moon, they're not the moon, right?
Yeah, you have to really know what's true for you.
That's right.
And
that's what the Buddha says, and that's what the teachings will say. You'll be reading in a text, but you're still reading it in a text.
It's right. Hasn't been fully integrated into this experience.
That's right. And I think ultimately what I've been discovering particularly in the last 5 years, is that this external referencing of self is built on a fundamental sense of lack of self-trust, but lack of self-worth. It's like, who am I to know? These scholars, these sages, these men in robes, who am I? But who am I? That's the question. Who
oh my gosh,
am I?
That is the question. I ask constantly.
Yeah. Like, if all those practices are telling you that it's within you, and yet who am I to try? Like, do you see the little loop that that I'm unwinding? Is this? It's already you.
And
it's already me.
Yeah, and in that it's through the experiences within the body.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and then if there's anything else that you had. But I just wanted to go back, because we had talked about the embodied feminine, and I just wanted to reference, because it was such a key piece for me, is learning about my cycle. And learning about the body and the different cycles that it goes throughout the period. Yeah. And so would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that's really a big part of embodiment, is learning how to listen to the cycles of our body and how they reflect the cycles of nature, how, we're one and the same. So in the same way that in Chinese medicine we look at the 5 elements and the seasons, and, in embodied feminine practice we look at the cycles of the moon, and how we as women are...
or as people with wombs.
As people with wombs. That's absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone that menstruates is aligned with these natural rhythms of these particular cycles. And what we can notice is that, it's not just about procreation. It's not just about we ovulate at this time and then we menstruate at this time in order to have a baby. It's so much more than that. At different phases of the cycle, our bodies are producing different hormones that create not only physical experiences, but emotional experiences, availability of amounts of energy, how socially interactive we are, how receptive we are, how creative we are, how, and it's one of those things that we already know. It's just learning this stuff gives us an opportunity to look and be like, oh yeah, that is my experience, that when we're ovulating, we have the most energy. It's like summer or midday in the cycles, daily cycles, yearly cycles, monthly cycles. It's when we're the most creative, when we can manifest things in the world, where we're most available for other people, when we...
Social engagement.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas the opposite, the menstrual time, is when we're our most yin, our most inward. It's new moon as opposed to full moon. It's when we're most receptive and therefore most sensitive. It's when we might feel like we want space from the world. We might want to go inside. And in my opinion, very profoundly so, because it's also when the veils between this realm and the spiritual realm, or the conscious and the subconscious, are the thinnest. So we can tap even more into that internal listening in those times. It's one of the gifts of menstruation. So we start to notice that at different times we are feeling different ways. And if we start to notice that that's who we are, that it's inherent, it's innate, our bodies are part of nature, then we can learn to honor that, and we can align our lifestyles with that. So rather than just pushing and going and externalizing consistently throughout the month, which, in my
people do.
That's absolutely. But what I've noticed in the sort of 12-something years that I've been teaching that work with that focus is that the more we're overriding, the more imbalanced the hormones become, the more out of balance the reproductive system becomes, and our mental and emotional reality,
and all of it just depletes.
Yeah. That's right, because we can't override our body for too long. We can't pretend we're not the earth and part of it for too long. It bounces back. It's not true. What's not true it's going to eventually reveal itself as not true. That's right. So my work has been very much about teaching that inquiry around your own self-reflection with your own cycles, and starting to align your life with that. There are certain foods that you can eat at certain times because the brain is working in a certain way and is nourished by certain nutrition when it's producing certain hormones. There are all these ways you can work with what is instead of against it to create hormonal harmony and emotional regulation and well-being.
And that was a whole new concept to me.
Right. I think to all of us, I was about to say all of us when we first learned it. But
that's right.
It's not taught. It's not taught in schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mum didn't teach me that. She didn't know. So I think that's why I'm really passionate about teaching it, especially in teacher training, so more people can teach them. Tell your brothers, tell your husbands, tell your sisters, tell your mothers.
And that's one of the first things so you taught the Yin class, you taught honoring your moon cycle. And so that kind of led me to, in that very first 200 hour, those were the things you touched on. And I was like, who is this woman? What have I been doing for the last, 30-something years?
And all of it, no matter what umbrella that, we're studying under, all of those things that I'm pointing to are attuning to your body. Just attuning to your body in all these different ways. They're all under the umbrella of embodiment and how the body is the barometer for the soul. And there it is.
There it is. That is it. Yeah, and I just had this beautiful experience yesterday in your Yin class where it was I had come full circle. It was just, I had listened to the very first Yin class that I took from you on day 10 of my 200-hour training. And we did some of the same postures as we did last night in class. And it was just, I just had so much gratitude.
See, there it is, that opening of gratitude that comes, right?
Tears and gratitude.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure, Brittany. And what a pleasure this has been.
Oh,
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Is there anything else you wanted to touch upon?
That feels really complete for me.
Okay,
Thanks for the opportunity.
And she has some upcoming trainings and retreats. Can you tell them about it?
Sure, yeah. So you can go to my website. It's held.tinanance, my name.com. We have 6 100-hour programs that we offer over a 2-year cycle. So this year we have the restorative yoga nervous system regulation training, where you learn about specific practices to tone the vagus nerve and help to regulate the system from disassociation or anxiety or depression back into equilibrium. We have an embodied trauma integration training in September, which incorporates somatic experiencing, internal family systems that we were speaking to today, trauma-informed yoga. We have the embodied feminine training that we've touched on quite a lot in November this year. And then next year we'll have the Yin Yoga, the yoga therapy, the embodied mindfulness. So all the information is on my website. So
and these are all in person in Bali.
They're all in person in Bali. We are going to start offering some online trainings eventually next year. And on the platform, on the website, you'll also see there's online classes that we've started to offer. There's a whole lot of nervous system regulation stuff coming out there. We're increasing the online platform so that we can have a wider reach and get these things to people far and wide.
That's great. And you have a couple retreats as well.
Yeah, that's right. We have 2 nervous system regulation retreats. And really we've kind of done that in response to post-pandemic frenzy. Living here in Bali, we have so many people that are arriving after the last couple of years that are like, and they're like, we just need a space to, So we just created those containers. So they're like 1 week retreats up in this beautiful location in Bali. It's called the Yogi's Gardens, where you're literally eating organic food from the land.
I've been there. It's incredible.
So
it's
beautiful. And each day you get these nourishing spa treatments and do self-regulating practices, and very nourishing. You also get empowered with a lot of nervous system education, so you can learn to regulate your system when you get back home. So
if you haven't been to Bali, come. Work with Tina. And if not, catch her online. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you.